Hi, Hashim. Welcome to the Conversations on Big Cats. This has just been something I've been wanting to do for so long. And now we have people from 9 countries talking about 8 species, and there's scientists and there's filmmakers and photographers and people working in conservation tourism. And, having known you for most of my life and seeing the amazing things that started off with those wonderful Tiger Tops groups long ago, it was but obvious that I would turn around and say, Hashim, can you please talk to us about your unique, special brand of conservation tourism, which has influenced so much of what has happened, especially in central India, and now, of course, extending to snow leopards in Ladakh. So over to you, Hashim.
That's really kind, Latika, and really good to see you. As you say, I've known you and your family for most of your life, certainly, and a lot of mine. And so it's it's great. I mean, do you want me to put the presentation on a little bit?
Yes, or? Please, yes.
Yeah. So let me just try and.
I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, okay, here we go. And it's all pretty much. So I mean, very briefly, I came to conservation tourism, like so many of us, completely by accident. And I won't call it conservation tourism. In 1978, it was a whole bunch of us having fun in the jungle. So let's not dignify it with any more than what it actually was. But, for many of us, the mothership was Tiger Tops Jungle Lodge. That was the sort of pioneering venture in the jungles of southern Nepal. And the interesting thing, though, was the fact that, it started in the 1960s, in the early 1960s. There was a guy called John Copeman. I think you know the story. But that was still very much a hunting-related tourism. It was a wildlife tourism with very much a hunting theme. But in 1973, when India kind of kicked off Project Tiger, the Wildlife Protection Act was enacted. That pretty much indicated that tiger hunting was done, and Nepal also followed suit very quickly. Also influenced by Guy Montfort and gang. And John Copeman, by this time, had to run away from Nepal. I mean, it was all a big dramatic story, which I'm sure Lisa has shared with you. The guys who took over, Chuck McDougall and Jim Edwards, actually ran a tiger hunting company in West Nepal. When they took over in 1973, however, Chuck, who was a passionate tiger lover and had actually made his career in the subcontinent because of tigers, although he was an anthropologist by trade, but it was tigers that brought him to the subcontinent. They knew that what they wanted to do was to conserve tigers. And the fact that Jim had his own unique perception of conservation, Chuck McDougall was, of course, deeply embedded not only in the management of the park, but also in the research on tigers. He was a research associate with the very long-running Smithsonian Tiger Ecology Project, which threw up so much of what we know of basic tiger ecology at the moment. I mean, that is the foundational knowledge. We all look to Shala and Deer and the Tiger, but people forget that a lot of the stuff we actually got to know was from the long-running Chitwan project, and Chuck was one of the key people. So all of that began to influence us, and we called it wildlife tourism at that time. And the fact that, there was a very distinct and I would say deliberate change in focus from the hunting kind of romanticized, gun-toting, John Copeman, larger-than-life sort of thing to a typical, downplayed Chuck McDougall, hardcore scientist, very much tiger-focused, conservation-focused thing. And that rubbed off on all of us. We didn't realize it, but it rubbed off on all of us. And of course, this is what Chuck came out with, The Face of the Tiger, one of the classic books on wild tiger, land tenure systems in particular. And this was a tiger that we all knew very well. Chuck called it Maila Bhale. He was the resident tiger in our area. And this was one of the first great trap photographs or trip photographs that, was taken in Nepal. From Chitwan, of course, that whole brand of wildlife tourism, it was still, I would still call it wildlife tourism, conservation tourism in all its many-faceted splendor hadn't yet quite been coined. But that unique brand of Tiger Tops tourism was first actually imported to southern India. And a lot of people don't know this, that Nagarhole, the Kabini River Lodge, was a Tiger Tops creation. And that is what kickstarted wildlife tourism in South India and actually gave it that conservation focus. because it was all Tiger Tops trained people. It was the great sort of, Colonel John Wakefield, who was the director, the resident director, who, of course, knew your family from before you were born. And you had Ramesh Mehra, the very, very effective managing director of Jungle Lodges and Resorts. Jim Edwards, of course, was the guiding spirit. Chuck McDougall used to go there. And for a brief while, as I was director of operations for India, I used to go there quite a lot myself. But then you had the great naturalists who were Tiger Tops trained. Sundar Raj, who was the chief naturalist for a long time. Murli, who was, a fantastic scientist. So all of those guys gave South Indian wildlife tourism the conservation focus that it now has and has led to so much. But there was a learning process, which, we all tend to also forget. When Tiger Tops went down, Mr. Gundu Rao was the chief minister, and Tiger Tops had gone on his invitation. And they tried to replicate the concession model of tourism by creating a wildlife lodge in the middle of the jungle at what is Mastiguri, which was the area of the last Kheda took place, which is just opposite this point on the Kabini River. And of course, the formidable Ullas Karath wasn't having any of that, and he mounted a very, very effective campaign in the press against it, quite rightly in hindsight, and said, look, this is an elephant corridor. There's no way that you're going to have, a big wildlife lodge over there. So that had to be shifted, and it has now gone to the Maharaja of Mysore's hunting lodge, and, the two places were built over there. So Tiger Tops learned a lesson from there as well. And, another sort of, you might say, another learning chapter was written into the conservation tourism book for India anyway, that we can't take concessionary exclusive lodges into our areas where national parks are going to be declared. On the plus side, Jim Edwards was the one who stopped the teak felling, the logging in that area, and insisted that become a part of the Nagarhole National Park. So that was the huge plus that Tiger Tops brought into it, quite apart from its manner of operation. And that is thriving now. And South India has now become the whole Western Ghat area. That whole area we all know. it's one of the great wildlife tourism destinations for all of Asia, not just South Asia, over there. And then, of course, at the same time, they wanted to move into the central Indian landscape. There were talks with the Wrights in Kanha, which didn't go very far. But they were also speaking to K.K. Singh, who had started a very small operation in the Maharaja's Koti. And Bandhavgarh was, of course, fantastic. We all remember what it was like in the days. There's KK sitting over there, looking on the fort, looking out over the landscape that we all love so much. And, I'm sitting right here, looking at the fort. Although I can't say that, there was a deliberate conservation tourism philosophy sort of guiding the growth of the Bandhavgarh Jungle Camp as it then was. But we learned a lot of lessons. And the reason why we didn't need conservation tourism was because there was no tourism. There was just one lodge, and the wonderful White Tiger Lodge, which Ranjit Singh Ji had made. And if you remember, the old White Tiger Lodge was actually built beautifully on the Charanganga River with just 8 rooms. They've gone and made a monstrosity now. But that was it. There were 3.5 jeeps in the park. So, it was all very, very contained. It was all very sustainable. It was all very low-key. It was tenting. It was, all of that. But one of the interesting things, Latika, that happened over that time, I love this photograph. That's the old pujari of Ram Temple on top of the fort being watched by Banka, the first tiger that I started tracking and following. And he's watching him. And this is a damn good comment on actually how tigers and humans coexist in the Indian landscape. But as we started spending more and more time over here, 2 things started happening. We started eyeballing tigers in a way that had only been done in Ranthambore before. Previously in Chitwan and so on, it was all, in other places, it was either radio collars or tracking. Here we were having the unique opportunity of following individual tigers day in, day out, year in, year out, building up a huge repository of actual knowledge of their relationships and how interrelated tigers work together. So this was a great part of what was going on in Bandhavgarh and gave us an opportunity to actually add to our knowledge of tigers. So, the whole thing about all males being dangerous to all cubs was not just busted over here, but this is the famous Sita with her second litter. This is Sita on the right with her the male from her first cub. Now, she was a young mother. At the age of when her first cubs were 16 months old, she had enough of them, got rid of them. And guess who looked after them? Their father looked after them. And we had actually recorded the father, Baka, looking after the cubs as early as the age of 3 to 4 months, calling them to a kill, which then Valmik wrote about. And I had actually recorded this and written it up in the notes for the journal of the BNHS. So, all of this was happening. At the same time, we were noticing that as tourism grew over the next sort of decade and a half, the density of tigers started increasing. So much so that now quite well-known tiger ecologist, tiger biologist, I should say, said to me once, he said, there are too many tigers in Bandhavgarh. A remark that kind of left me slightly speechless because, you think, well, what's that supposed to mean? Tigers will do what they do. How can you decide for them whether there's too many of them or not? But anyway, so that was, if you remember, those were the heady days when Bandhavgarh, had all those many tigers. Of course, they were overcounted. So anyway, so that was a huge learning experience. And we kind of put 2 and 2 together and said, well, what changed? What changed was the fact that tourism increased. So when it came turn for my friends and I to start a company, Wild India Camps, and start a new lodge, we abandoned Kanha and Bandhavgarh, which still had very few tourist lodges in those days, and moved to Pench. And one of the things that drove us there was the fact that Pench, I'd had a conversation with Ullas Karant, who had done a study there, and he'd said to me privately, he said, it seems to him that Pench has a lower tiger number than the carrying capacity as indicated by prey biomass, which may indicate, he wasn't sure, but he said, it could indicate selective poaching. So we wanted to test out 2 things. One, that does tourism actually improve tiger numbers? Is it actually an engine, a driver for conservation? And B, could we make a good enough model out there that assured tiger numbers wasn't a barrier for the growth of wildlife? So we moved to Pench. Fantastic place. When we for the first couple of years, we had the park to ourselves, and how exciting is that? It was like Bandhavgarh and Kanha in the old days. Sure enough, very few tiger sightings in the early days, but prey numbers were huge. No reason why tigers shouldn't come back. And very quickly the tigers were back. Surprisingly quickly. And now, of course, you see all the hype about Pench, having the tigresses with the highest breeding records. And not surprising, it has a fantastic, very, very high prey biomass out there. So there's no reason. And that is one of the drivers we know. And from studies done in Chitwan, we know that adequate food supplies is a massive thing. So we were quite happy with how, what we did with Pench, but I'm very unhappy with the fact that government, despite understanding that unregulated tourism is not a great advertisement for the industry, didn't actually put in place the regulatory mechanisms to actually control how tourism grew over there. So very soon it became a mess again, and now Turia, sadly, is hugely, hugely crowded. Although the protected area of the park is fabulous, and tigers are humming. It's a success story. We then moved, and here's an interesting thing, Latika. I'm just going to look at the 2001 foreign numbers 14, total number 5,274 of Indians, less than 3 lakhs rupees of revenue. 2018-2019, over 3 lakhs of revenue. Numbers had grown massively. Look at that. Can you hear me, Latika? Hello?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on mute.
Okay, sorry. So now you can see what it's done. 2006, 2007, just look at the increase in tiger population. And this was being done after 2006 when a much more rigorous censusing mechanism was used. And then from 2011, I don't have the numbers, but the latest numbers are much, much higher. They're sort of 53 for the park and so on. So, clearly, tourism does play some part in the growth of tiger numbers. And in worst case scenario, even if tourism isn't the cause, if you still deny that tourism doesn't actually increase tiger numbers, well, it certainly doesn't decrease them. Because every study has shown that in Pench, a very good study showed that tiger numbers in the core area where tourism operated was exactly the same as outside the tourism zone. In fact, slightly higher densities in the tourism zone. So, so that is a good thing. Then in 2007, when we wanted to build a new lodge, we moved to Satpura. And over there, we helped create what I think is for India a unique model, but basically replicated the model of tourism that I had grown up with in Nepal. And, Satpura, when we went, hardly any tigers, but a fantastic park for sloth bears, for leopards, for wild dogs, fabulous scenery, great gore numbers, terrific, very, very high prey base, especially sambar and gore and wild boar. And so no reason why there shouldn't be more tigers over there. Well, the model of tourism that we kind of discussed with the government and put a note up to them depended on three things. One, limited number of vehicles in the park, a much wider range of activities which centered around canoeing and walking particularly, and allowing hides to come in, and full day programs all the way to Churna and back. Now what the canoeing did was it allowed us access. It did two things. It absorbed many of the fishermen who were overfishing this lake as boat guides. It allowed these guys to go in quietly into inlets where fishermen were quietly accessing with nobody following them. Nobody knew what they were doing there, how they were going there, and we found people camping there. And then when we started walking in two exclusive areas within the core zone, within the core area, in the initial stages, we were surprising fishermen camping inside the park, inside the core area. Well, that very quickly stopped. And then over the years, and of course it was a fabulous experience to sort of enjoy the park in a way that you couldn't until then enjoy any other tiger reserve in the country. The walking itself, of course, focusing a lot on signs and tracks and smaller animals, smaller wildlife. But every now and again, you'd meet a leopard, you'd meet a tiger, you'd meet a sloth bear, you'd come across a herd of gore. It was just, and for one whole season, the walking would be right in the middle of a pack of denning dogs, of wild dogs. Similarly, the jeep rides, it used to be only 12 jeeps. Now I think it's 15. So, what a fantastic way to experience a park. And I'm really happy that Madhya Pradesh has maintained this, hasn't allowed this model to be diluted in any way. In fact, has improved on it with all the buffer zone tourism and the camping and the long hikes on the Forsyth Trail. Well, guess what? Tigers have started coming back into the Satpura landscape. And so, overall, although the control outside the park should probably be a bit better, but on the whole, I think Satpura has been a great success story. And for some of this, Pench and Satpura, I guess we could take a little bit of credit for opening these parks and putting our money where our mouth is, and actually saying, well, this is what we believe in, and here we're going to actually invest in it and see what we can do. And I think it's kind of paid off. Yeah,
fantastic. That was a very quick presentation, but we're not going to let you go so easily. I don't
want to just keep talking. I thought it was much more fun if I talked to you.
Yeah. Okay, no, but that was amazing. So one of the interesting things that you've done is also your mobile camping. Will you tell us about that? And does it go into both parks and outside landscapes? How does it work?
Well, again, so our mobile camp is called Kafila. We keep it on a very small scale. Only now we just have 5 tents that we go in over there. And again, this idea came up through slightly to my disappointment at the fact that we go to new places, we go to fabulous new landscapes, new national parks, and the government fails in one key area, which is controlling and regulating development outside the national park. Okay, through whatever the reasons. But that is, to me, a massive failure. And what it does is, it does two things which to me are very damaging. One, it destroys the beauty of the landscape. It destroys the aesthetic beauty of the landscape. It puts a huge amount of pressure on the resources over there. It brings in jobs, of course it does. It brings in, accelerated economic development. But why can't we do it in a way that is aesthetically pleasing? Why can't we do it imaginatively, in a way that doesn't spoil the landscape? Why can't we do it in a way that is respectful of local cultures and local communities, of all the things that we consider as conservation tourism? Conservation tourism isn't just about protecting tigers, it's protecting the entire landscape that you're operating in. A responsible use of resources, a responsible way of dealing with waste, of how we direct development, What kind of development do we want in that area? So all of this needs to be thought through, and it's not rocket science. It's quite simple to do. Anyway, so disappointment both in Pench and to some extent in Satpura. So we thought, well, the next thing that we're going to do, therefore, is to have a mobile camp where we go in 3-4 days in one area, 5 days in one area, and we're gone. And we do it in a way that doesn't, that leaves 2 waste disposal pits, which we come back and check in 6 months. And, we know that it's just all reduced to composted material. So we took a long time designing it. It took a year and a half to get all our technologies and all our designs together. And we could now go to any interesting landscape off the beaten track. The strap line is beyond the last hotel. So one of the key things needs to be that there shouldn't be any acceptable hostelries or accommodations in the area. So one of the places we go to is Kuno Palpur, which is one of our absolute favorite places. Classic example of how areas beyond the ken of tourism actually probably suffers from big cat selective poaching. Because now that is directly connected by, there's a direct corridor connecting it to Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, to that whole landscape, the Ranthambore Kaila Devi protected area. You would have thought, with this massive prey base and the huge amount of management elements that have gone into Kuno, that would be humming with tigers. It should be, right?
Yeah.
Well, there are no tigers there. There are no tigers there. Every now and again, one old tiger might wander in, but there are no tigers there. So the tigers that are dispersing southwards along a natural dispersal route are obviously being hammered. So, but we go there, we love it. We go into the park, we are there literally from first light to last light. It's difficult wildlife viewing because the animals are not habituated, but very high numbers, fabulous landscapes. And at one time, one of the great tiger landscapes of northwest and central India. So that's one of our big areas. We go into the Maikal Hills, especially sort of interacting with local tribal people, with beggars. We go up into the highlands above 3,000 feet, where you actually begin to experience a little bit of the last of the, I hesitate to use the word, but there is a little bit of authenticity left to those beggar cultures, and which is why the person who took us there doesn't allow us to give the location, because he doesn't want all the big sort of,
everybody coming in. Yes.
And the big lenses coming in and spoiling it. We go to Chanderi, we go to Kalinjar, and we go to Pilibhit and the Tarai. We go to now a lot into Kutch from next season. If there is a season next year, we're going to be starting in Kutch, and we're really excited about that. And Kutch is fantastic because you've got Dholavira, one of the biggest IVC sites in India. You've got fabulous wildlife. You've got great culture.
Yes.
And so it just suits our, the sort of the thesis of our camp down to the ground. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of questions that people ask often focus on working in this field, and for young people, when they dream of doing something like working with Kafila camps, what are the sort of backgrounds that you're looking for? What are the qualities in a person that help you identify somebody who can be one of your team?
Number 1, enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
Enthusiasm. Number 2, enthusiasm. And I guess number 3, an ability to communicate.
Okay.
Because the one thing that I think is a truism in all wildlife guide trainers, and I'm not a trainer, but I've worked with youngsters and taught myself to a very good extent, and was taught by Chuck McDougall and so on. But one of the things that I've always said to people who come to work for us, youngsters who come to work for us, is if you want to do research, go join an academic institution. That's where you need to be. Mm-hmm. What we want over here are people who are excited, enthused, who come alive in the wilderness, but are storytellers, mm-hmm. who can communicate, and which is why I say enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is the great quality that makes the other person smile, whoever's listening to you. I want people. I remember David Raju. He's got one eye on. He's got one part of his brain on the conversation or his food or whatever, But while, he was like a jack in the box in the, suddenly he'd be up leaping about and, catching some poor frightened dragonfly and saying, new to science, and then everybody would crowd around and, and take photographs and this and that and the other. So, of course, David was immediately, the name for him is new to science, because everything is new to science, But the enthusiasm, one of him, Surya, another one of our stars, and all the youngsters there at the moment, Vineet, who's there at the moment, and Dipankar and all the, it's that is what actually. So when we talk of the educational element of wildlife tourism, well, that is the educational element, getting people alive, making them lifelong acolytes of the jungle school, of the school of the wilderness, and in every aspect. And what is absolutely fantastic, Latika, which you as a lodge owner, you worked with youngsters, you've seen, is that these guys, we were sort of tigers, wild, big mammals, birds, maybe butterflies, a few trees. These guys now, with far better resources than we had, but also a far greater sensitivity to the entire sort of ecosystem. They are looking at spiders in a very detailed way. They're looking at little things. They're looking at entire ecosystems and telling great stories. Yes. They don't stop at just identifying and telling the little things about, the basic breeding. They're actually looking at, the interweave of networks. So we used to have a program, which they still do at Forsyths, called the Junior Rangers course. And I still get mails from mothers, who had brought their children over there saying, so sad to hear that you guys sold out. I want to tell you that, they lit, you guys lit a fuse, and we go every year, we take our kids and so on. So that's what we look at: enthusiasm, storytelling.
Fantastic. But, this also then directly connects with this whole lockdown and the whole COVID pandemic. And this horrible thing about having to wear masks, because it just puts this immediate barrier between you and the next person. They can't see your face, they can't see your smile, they can't read your expression. So it becomes so difficult. And I personally feel that this is going to be a big issue in wildlife tourism, because your whole enchantment with the scene is now halved or quartered because you've got this mask on somebody's face. What do you suggest we do about this? How do you think we should deal with this? This is a big issue.
Oh, God, to be honest, I hadn't even thought of that. But you're absolutely right.
You get on and you get into the park and you have a mahout smiling down from an elephant at you. You don't know that he's smiling anymore.
Yeah. It's easier to recognize the elephant rather than the mouth now. Previously, you know which elephant it was from the mouth. Now it'll be the other way around.
So this is a big issue, and this is something that's been really worrying me, because the smile, the warmth,
and the muffled voice.
And if you wear dark glasses in the field, then you literally see nothing of the face at all, and it's sad. It's really, really sad. So
I suppose I'm slightly spoiled over here because I'm in the middle. My house is so far from anybody. Surrounded on three sides by the tiger reserve, and barely actually see anybody. So I don't wear a mask on a regular basis. I carry it with me just in case the police get tough if I go to do any shopping. But I think what you're saying is extremely valid, and I don't know how. I suppose the only thing that we can hope for is that as numbers spike, as tourism grows, who knows which way it's going? Are we heading towards herd immunity? I've stopped even reading all of this stuff because everybody's contradicting everybody all the time.
Absolutely, yes.
So it's just bheja fry at the moment. Maybe by the time wildlife tourism or all tourism comes back, because I think all of us in this field, in this conservation tourism field, which we always talk about, the two elements, the conservation side of things, the effect our presence over here has on on the environment, on the ecosystem, on wildlife, and so on. That's one end. The other end is the actual business side of it, the communication, the guiding, the experience for the client, which, as you very rightly said, is everything to do with the guide. If maybe by the time people are happy to travel, by the time tourism comes back, there will be a lessening of the contagion.
One can only hope. It's
a
tough one.
I think what you say is very valid.
Because you're sitting in a vehicle with somebody, you're sitting in a hide with somebody. It's just it's very tough to deal with. It's difficult. So tell me, Hashim, what else have you been involved with? Looking at the big cat scenario and looking at the way the differences have arisen between Nepal and India on the way they handle protection of big cats and the way they run their national parks. Have you actually been involved with any of that and discussing how we could change things in India and learn a bit from our neighbors on being so much more effective? Because we go through these cycles of poaching, and just as we think we're coming on top, we go into another slide.
Well, you may recall that a fair few years ago, when I actually built this house and moved here, I kind of made a deliberate shift away from the tourism side. I mean, I used to make my bread and butter from tourism, but my everyday, what I considered my everyday sort of activities was more direct conservation in two areas. One was we started the Van Suraksha Samitis, and here I was the first head for the Van Suraksha, or the forest protection committees, which led to my then becoming the honorary wildlife warden for Shedol, which essentially meant this area. And then actually served with your father on the Indian Board for Wildlife. And so there was a lot of talk as to what we did. So there was the physical side of the protection thing as well. One of the things that I tell you is very, very clear: the difference between Nepal and India, or used to be when I was in Nepal. In Nepal, they followed a much more American system of wildlife administration, of the conservation management system. In that, it was much less hierarchical. There wasn't this militarized system. Because our wildlife department was created by ex-British Army officers, Indian Army officers back in the 1860s. The whole uniform things. I mean, why is a forester come to a senior officer and salutes him? Where does that come from? Why are they in berets? Why are they in military uniforms? Where is this hierarchy from? So that hierarchy was created because it was created by army officers, and we've just slavishly stuck to that. We have a very, very, the only way to describe the forest department's attitude, and forest officers think it's a criticism of them. It's not. It's not a criticism of individuals, because they are fabulous individuals in the service who have made. It's not the people outside the conservation fraternity outside who have protected tigers. It's the forest department that has protected tigers, for better or ill.
We all agree.
So we all agree, but we can say, yes, guys, credit where credit is due, but the system needs reform to be even more effective. Now, the Nepal system, there was a lot of very egalitarian American systems. They were open-minded. They looked to outside help. They brought in help from wherever. It was a much more porous system of expertise being recruited. They themselves, many of the managers there, actually were researchers with the Smithsonian. They worked very closely with scientists. So there was a massive the management was informed by science and supported by tourism, which is the troika we always talk about, right? Management has to be informed by science. It can't be that somebody who's come from social forestry gets, promoted as director of a national park and then, is bringing his own arbitrary whims, fancies, biases, prejudices to play. And then if a scientist goes and criticizes them, the scientist is the bad guy. Okay? So that is one problem. You then have this direct entry into the officer class. You have this thing. In a forest service, there should be entry at one level. And that level should be at the forest guard level. And we shouldn't call them forest guards, we should call them rangers. They should be trained. They should come up to a particular standard. They should be superbly equipped. And they should all be properly qualified. They should all sit for the same exam. And then they all rise to the ranks from the bottom to the top. It's the same service all the way to the top. Okay? That is how a senior manager understands the problems of a junior ranger in the field. At the moment they do, because none of them have sat in a little chowki in the middle of the monsoon, 6 days march away in malarial forests. They haven't done it. The physical this thing. So when the guy says, oh, you're not patrolling the area. Well, buddy, I don't have the equipment to patrol the area. And you are sitting comfortably, where your children can get educated. We don't have, the Nepal army, rightly or wrongly, recruited the Nepal Forest Service, has the army, a battalion of the army protecting the whole thing. So there is, and they use it as a training ground for jungle warfare. Good, bad, I don't know, but they're certainly effective, because you certainly don't want to meet a fully armed Gorkha soldier in the middle of the jungle, right? I think far more scary than meeting a forest guard with an old 315. So we have lots of lessons to learn. One thing I've never understood, Ladakh. Look at this. You look at when I first started working, in this field and going into the jungles. The head of the forest department of a state, I'm talking about 1976, was a chief conservator of forests. Then finally it became a principal chief conservator of forests because there was an explosion of CCFs. Now there's an explosion of PCCFs. Just calculate how many resources a PCCF soaks up. Doing what in Bhopal or Jaipur or Delhi or wherever? At the cost of whom? At the cost of the recruitment of the front line of defense, which is your forest guard. Now, how ridiculous can it be that a country like India, essentially a superpower, one of the biggest economies in the world, but our tiger reserves had to ask for funding from the general public to supply rations into the parks. Okay. Now, our poor conservation managers, the guys on the ground out here, they're struggling because they are told by the government. There are ridiculous situations where NTCA is sending budgets which are so restrictive that you can use this money for compensation for tigers, but not for elephant damage. So there's more ample money, but no porosity because NTCA says, no, you can't do it. So there's, where does one start? So the reform of the system, the reform of law, I think we can learn a heck of a lot. I'll give you a little example. Let's go a little bit further afield. Borneo, I was in Borneo and I wanted to see pitcher plants, the largest pitcher plant, which is in one of the parks in Borneo. We came in slightly late and there was a very humble looking guy locking up over there. And my guide said, oh, wait, he's the world's greatest expert on pitcher plants. I'll go and talk to him. So this humble guy, came along. He said, yeah, come along. So he locked up and things like that. And we went off. It was the director of the park. It was the director of the park, okay, Mount Kinabalu. One of the most important parks in in Asia. And he said, come. And he had joined, he was a tribal from the area, he had joined as a ranger. Got educated, did his PhD in Edinburgh, came to India and Nepal and to northeastern India because there's a pitcher plant there also that he wanted to study, and went back. That's the difference.
Amazing.
So where do you start?
I think another thing that we do need to talk about is, we've talked about changes in the forest department, the way it functions as a body. We've talked about the complete lack of controlling unplanned development on the outskirts of the park. But I think a third area which is really, really important is the complete lack of coordination between different arms of the government when dealing with national parks.
No.
The left arm doesn't know what the right arm is doing, and it just, and then there's this division between the state and the center, which is, enough to drive everyone absolutely batty.
Yeah.
So I think these are all issues that we really need to take into account. Also, to me, very sadly, is the fact that nowhere in India does the education system take into account that there needs to be a special sort of education for the children living on the edges of these national parks. Something that teaches them about their livelihood. And I'd love to hear your views on that.
Latika, let me just quickly add to what you said earlier about the different arms of department. I mean, it is so dependent on personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've had situations over here that the wildlife wing, that is the park management and the territorial management, have been at complete loggerheads. Forget between different departments. This is within the department.
Mm-hmm.
And between revenue. So in the Indian system, everything boils down to personalities, much more so than in other systems. And that's a cat's cradle of complications. So, we could talk forever on that.
Yeah.
But education is something, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. So because that is, what we call the foundational knowledge. And I was just saying to somebody who works who does extension work and conflict mitigation work in the environs of Bandhavgarh for one of the NGOs. And, he takes meetings and things like that. Very good guy and does all this work. But I was saying to him, I said, every time you take a conflict management or conflict mitigation meeting, you're only talking to those individuals. And then they will go away, and a year later they'll have forgotten. But what about the 80% who didn't come to the meeting? So what we have to do, we have to address youngsters. You're absolutely right. It has to be a fundamental element of education over here. So it's very simple. So right at this moment, I'm working with my village school here, trying to make it into some kind of a model school so that, we can then use it and say to funding agencies and government to say, hey guys, very little money is needed to change this. And we're doing a simple thing. We're doing two simple things. We're putting in drinking water in there, which we've already done. We're going to try and improve the toilets, but before that, we are putting in a full audiovisual kit, completely connected up to the internet. And maybe, I'm still waiting to hear, maybe Geo will give us a helping hand over there. So the classrooms,
also.
So classrooms will become a quasi-digital classroom.
Yes.
And that will suddenly open up the world to these people. Now, the government, actually, the education department actually has some very, very good software for teaching kids. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly good. So I've gone through it. The headmaster showed me. But they don't know, in these tribal villages, how do they get to the kids? The kids don't have the hardware. So I said, what's the solution? They said this, and I said, yep, exactly what I was thinking. Once we get that, how difficult then is it to put a cooler in each classroom and a whiteboard? Simple, isn't it? Just a bit of money. You've got electricity. Geo has done an amazing job. And where Airtel is damn good as well. It's actually quicker it's better broadband than Geo even, where it operates. So between those two, just get a dongle, and the world is at your fingertips. And there are fantastic, NGOs have come up with fantastic learning aids, digital learning aids. The government has great learning aids. And I am, fingers crossed, the teachers in these government schools are almost like dormant plants, just need a bit of water.
Yes. Yeah. So Hashim, is there a place that these teachers can go to access, where they can get these programs from? Because most people would not know. Is there a way that we could put this together?
Yeah, the government has it. The government's already got everything in place.
What do we go to? When they need to access this, what site do they access?
It's a WhatsApp group that they access. Okay. So what the government has done, it has created a very, very effective digital infrastructure. It's deeply impressive, Latika. And I'm really impressed by the work they've done.
So how can one get on this group?
Just go to a government school
Okay.
And speak to the computer science teacher. So, I mean, here's the interesting thing. So our school doesn't have a computer or an internet, but it has a computer science teacher.
We don't have a computer science teacher. I've given lots of computers and set up the whole system. We now have computers, we have a TV, we have an electricity connection, which I pay for.
Yeah.
And so we've started all of that, but we don't have a computer science teacher, so I don't know how to access.
Well, if it's a government school in Madhya Pradesh anyway, I know, you don't actually have to pay for the electricity because there's a budget there for electricity.
Okay, we'll look for it, but we got it going, so it's there.
Okay. So I'm just saying. So what happens is, it's not. But I'm just saying that to give government credit, it actually has a full interest. So I was asking these guys because we were talking to the panchayat as to the different streams of revenue that they can harness to make this happen. So I said, you've got to do your best. The gap, I will make arrangements, to do that. So we are putting in a laptop, a projector, a dongle, and a screen.
Fantastic.
And so, exactly what you've done. I'm now talking to various people who are going to put in whiteboards for these people. The way the digital classrooms work is that all the teaching material is distributed to the schools and from the schools to the students individually through WhatsApp, through links on the WhatsApp. They go straight onto that. As soon as they log on, their presence, their attendance is logged into the master system.
But that's assuming everybody has a phone.
That's the problem.
That's the problem.
That is the problem. So that is exactly why we are trying to say, okay, the hardware is the issue. The data, the cost of data is the issue. So this is where we are going into the digital classroom and saying, all right, that's not going to work. So this is how we're going to do it. And the whiteboards will then be connected up to the software that the government is distributing, and that will then be available to every class automatically. Fantastic. And then once that works, well, then who knows? Maybe people will see that it's reconditioned hardware can be brought into service, and we can talk to people. But we need that one thing, and the one great thing that all the teachers and I both discuss is don't make it heavy going. The first thing that kids need to be entertained. They need to be sparked.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I was also talking to Discovery Channel, and Discovery is actually doing a program where, one of these programs for education, and they're asking a lot of people to come in as speakers on this, and they approached me, and I actually put down the condition saying, I'll come and work for you and I'll do it for free. But what I want you to do is then make these resources available to tribal schools around national parks, especially in Madhya Pradesh, free of cost, because the schools can't afford to subscribe to your channels. But you do it free of cost and give this resource into schools. So I think slowly everything will fall into place. And
absolutely.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Last thing just before we end for the day, the whole issue of increased resource use because of unmanaged tourism coming into these parks. And and I know that this is a huge issue. I've seen what you do with Kafila. I've seen what you do at Forsyths. I've seen the Snow Leopard Lodge. But this is it's not the example that most people are following. Most people come in, build a concrete construction, get tourists in, make huge garbage dumps, and think that it's all going to go away. Or they can just stick their heads into sand like an ostrich and forget it exists. But now we're reading about plastic rain, and we're reading about plastic particles going into everything. And it's impossible. So what would you suggest we can do about that?
Okay, so obviously this is something that's been exercising us a lot. And, in India, it's a real mess at the moment. Because so there's two things. One is resource use. So, water management, in a country which is very quickly going to die because of a subcontinental thirst. That is something we all need to worry about and think about. So, I mean, you and us and, this small community of so-called responsible operations, we do all the right things. Just to also tell you that, at the Snow Leopard Lodge now, we are maybe a year or 2 years as we, come back out of this COVID pandemic. We're actually going to go back in our loos, even in the winter, we're going to go back to the Ladakhi system of composting toilets, because we believe that a Western style toilet is simply not appropriate to that area. And, what was there was much more appropriate. So we're going to make that change. Garbage. Now, here's the classic example. So we have a 3-stage garbage separation thing, like we all do, right? What is composted is composted. What can be sold to the Radiwala, and that is all it. What do you do with the rest, the plastic? What do you do with it? What do you do with it? You take it to a government dump. What does the government do with it?
Nothing. Burn it or leave it.
So until and unless, I love the way a lot of critics of tourism, and especially wildlife conservation, whatever tourism you want to call this, turn around and say, well, see, garbage disposal. So I always tell them, I said, okay, so tell me, give me what do you do end to end in your own homes, guys? Do you have some magical way of dealing with the plastic that you generate? And all of us generate plastic. So if you can't deal with the small amount of domestic plastic you are generating, because your responsibility ends when you give it to the Sarkari fellow who comes and collects your garbage and takes it to the dump, you think you've done a good thing because you separated everything. I said, we also do that. But where is the end-to-end solution? Where do we go? Now, I'll tell you, in Bandhavgarh, so I started taking it up. I mean, you haven't come to Tala for a bit, or you may have, I don't know. But Tala is a mess. So they clean the front and chuck it all into the bylanes at the back.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a mess. And I've been trying to work with the panchayat. I've been trying to tell the field director. I've been trying to talk to these guys. And I have various plans which are self-financing, but they're not willing to listen. Let's see. But they were telling me that the government was going to put a solid waste disposal unit over here. The forest department had found space for them, and it's on the Rancha Road, not far from Monsoon Forest. But this COVID thing came in the way, and so if you talk to the panchayat, there's one excuse. If you speak to the forest department, there's another excuse. Long and short of it is, it isn't there at the moment. But then, if it's a Sarkari system, who's going to collect the garbage? How is it going to be funded? How do you finance it? We don't think these solutions through. The local area committee under the commissioner or collector or whoever will simply turn around and say, you are not doing your job. Well, boss, you're the administration. We think you should do this, that, and the other. And we should do this, that, and the other. It's because until you actually have a proper, robust, self-financing model for collection of waste and then disposal of waste, you're going to have an empty waste disposal, solid waste disposal unit sitting out there, because the panchayat will turn around and say, we don't have the money the people are not paying taxes.
Yeah.
So,
we could talk about this and more forever. I mean, there's 100 more things that I could talk with you about. But thank you so much for doing this, Hashim.
Thank you. Thanks, Ladika.
Wonderful.
The goal going forward is to find newer audiences to watch the conservation stories that we have to tell.